Howdy, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the AggieCentral podcast. We got one more ride to take before one of these two teams moves on. It's going to be the Ole Miss Rebels versus the Miami Hurricanes in 24 hours. One team will win, one team will lose. It's inevitable. As I've been thinking about this matchup leading up to my prediction tonight, I couldn't help but envision a very particular scene from the movie Tombstone, one of my favorite movies. It's towards the end. It's when Johnny Ringo is waiting in the trees for Wyatt Earp to show up for a duel. Somebody walks up. Johnny Ringo notices him, so he starts to approach him. He says, "I didn't think you had it in you." The person approaching walks a little bit further. The sun pulls back and finally shines on his face, and it's Doc Holliday. And he realizes it's him, and he's stunned. Doc Holliday says, "I'm your Huckleberry." My thought on tonight or my thought tonight on this matchup is that after this game is over, one of these teams is going to realize this other team is not quite who they thought it was. Okay. Now, what I don't mean is that either team is underestimating the other one. That's not what I mean. But I think at the end of this grudge match, there's going to be a huge mutual respect that's going to grow between these two teams. They're going to go toe to toe, face to face. They're going to play their hearts out, and at the end, um, they're going to have just a lot more respect than they did leading up to this matchup. And that's the beauty of this whole game in the first place, right? That's why we do this, and that's why we love this. So here's what I'm going to do tonight: to give you a pathway for both teams to win this game before I give you my final prediction. Okay. I'm going to start with Ole Miss. I think Ole Miss is a little bit more intriguing because they're a little bit more of an anomaly. More Hurricanes are probably watching this than Rebels. So let's start with Ole Miss. Here's your offensive pathway. Start with them, and then we'll go to defense. Here's how I like to do it. I like to reason through this. I don't want to just give you a shot of like, hey, here's my prediction. Just I think they're going to score this many points, and just kind of come out of nowhere. I want to work up to it. So here's how I'm going to do that. Let's start with A&M. A&M versus Miami. 3 points. Okay. So is Ole Miss worth 3 points? Can they make 3 points? Okay. Yes. I'm gonna move up through this. I'm gonna do it quickly though. A&M basically had 10 points. They were one play away from it. No, they didn't get it. Obviously, I'm not going to get ready to try and say they actually scored 10. No, but it was there. It was right there for the taking. Under some different circumstances, they probably get the they probably get the touchdown. Let's just say, even had an opportunity earlier in the game to get that. What I'm saying is that I think I think we can reasonably assume that a good starting place for Ole Miss is 10 points. Okay. Now, I think Ole Miss is better than A&M offensively in some key ways. You might think not like overall, you probably could make a great case that they are, but in some key ways, I very specifically think Ole Miss is better. I think it starts with Chambliss, and I think it moves right through Wallace and Lacey. Let me explain. Marcel Reed is a dual threat quarterback, okay, and I can't help but keep coming back to this, but he's not used, let's just say, as a true dual threat. Any given play, he can run or he can throw, but he only does kind of one or the other. It's going to be one run or pass. It's never usually given the opportunity for it to be either or. Okay. Chambliss has that opportunity. They just by virtue of scheme of what Ole Miss does, they move him out of the pocket quite a bit more. So whenever he's out of the pocket, he legitimately has the threat to throw or to run. And that gives Ole Miss a very specific dynamic that I do think works a lot into their favor. Okay. Wallace, Alexander, both are excellent route runners. I think that's a big strength. And I think that works well and matches up well with what is probably, I mean, obviously the D line is Miami's strength. So secondary, whereas I think it's probably second in line, linebackers maybe third in line when you're putting the defensive position groups in order. Maybe cornerbacks even part of that. I think that gives them a good spot to potentially pick up some points. Haas is a very strong player, and Lacey, if they can hammer him and get some success running, and then maybe force some play action as well, this becomes a very very interesting, very dynamic offense. Okay, So, with that said, I think that very firmly puts Ole Miss into the neighborhood of 14 to 17 points comfortably. Okay. So that's almost kind of where my starting point is. And I want to try and maybe even work up from there to see what we think this team can actually end up scoring. So 14 to 17 points is what I kind of feel like Ole Miss has in the bag. Now, disclaimer, it could be 7 to 10 points at the end of the half, and then an extra field goal or touchdown or field goal touchdown combination come towards the end in garbage play. That's very easily a way that could turn out. Okay. But I think it's very likely something like that could happen. But I can't get to the additional points that I think this team might could score without getting to the defense. So let's kind of get over to them with with this being said. But one last point. Ole Miss on offense, you need to play clean. I'm going to cover Miami's defense here in just a second, talk about their pathway, and that factors in a lot, factors in big time. Ole Miss, you need to play clean throughout the game. Okay, limit turnovers, limit penalties. All right. Defensively, Ole Miss defensively, I think you need to shorten the game. Okay, now the game's 60 minutes long. You can't shorten that, right? No, you absolutely cannot, but you can. Okay, you got to think about this, and this is the way I'm going to go with this. I like to get a little bit more analytical, a little bit more common sense and reasonable. Take steps to get where I want to get to. Think about this in terms of possessions. Okay, and that's what we're going to do through the rest of this situation. Possessions, right? Ole Miss, you had 13 possessions against Georgia. You scored on I think 6 of those, and you had what, a safety in one of those. So somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 was 39 points. So I think you had like 4 touchdowns and 3 field goals, something along those lines. Anyways, you kind of understand what I'm getting at, though. I think it was 6, right around there. You're doing what, about 45% here. Okay, 45% um, is your scoring ratio. To do that, if you can take away additional possessions from Miami and transfer them to yourself, that would be huge. Now, tackles for loss and sacks don't exactly do it, but if you think about taking away possessions from Miami, who's currently converting 50% of their possessions, that becomes kind of quite a big deal, especially if you think about the fact that Miami only had 8 possessions in their game. Okay, they scored on 4 of those. So if you're able to take, say, 2 possessions away because you had a monstrous sack and they had end up having to punt, or even a turnover, maybe a fumble or something like that, then you can start limiting Miami's points pretty significantly. But turnovers are best. If you can force some turnovers, maybe even just force more field goals out of Miami, then you are in essence shortening the game. You're taking away possessions, and effective possessions. Possessions that result in touchdowns are way more effective than those that result in field goals, right? So that's what I mean when I say shortening the game. I think if you want to do that, though, you are going to have to play extremely aggressive. Okay, very aggressive. I think you need to roll the dice on this one. I think you need to bring it all. I mean, I'd love to see some cover zero at some time. I'd love to see somebody additional coming on every single play. And if I can, 40% is a lot typically for blitzing, but if I can get 50% out of you, I think it would really work into your favor. You're gonna need to affect Carson Beck. Okay. The games that have other teams have been able to win versus this team are when they can get him to force some turnovers. Louisville, 4 turnovers, SMU, 3 turnovers. Quick to address something. Yes, Ole Miss projects very similar to SMU. No, I don't think that means that they get the same type of result out of that just because it's very similar quarterback, um, wide receiver, and all that kind of stuff. Okay, but that was part of it with the turnovers and the INTs that Beck put up. He's just been really good ever since. I don't think he's thrown but one interception like the last 5 games. It's significant improvement. The yards per game are not there, but the turnovers are not. And gosh, I mean, what's a turnover worth? 50 to 75 yards. So, I mean, in those two losses, he was averaging three. Let's just take it on the low end, 50 yards per possession that are lost, let's just say. So the 150 yards. So he's right up there with, like, 250 plus yardage, you know, uh, with the effectiveness and the benefit that those non-turnovers give to Miami. Okay. So you need to affect him. You need to, I don't think it matters if you're going to play man or if you're going to play zone. You can affect him, get him to throw off just by a little bit, or pressure him to put one in there. You can come up with some turnovers. It's going to be difficult. That's not been part of their MO. But if you can find a way to do that, you start taking away possessions, and that's the whole point. Okay, so if you can do that, I think that you wrestle away a possession or two, get the ball back on a short field, maybe even have a decent punt return, kickoff return, make yourself another short field, something along those lines, and you can add to yourself 7 to 10 points, I think, very reasonably. Okay, 7 to 10 points very reasonably. That puts you in the 24 to 27 point range. Okay, 24 to 27 point range. If you play clean, um, and if you have just a little bit higher efficiency than what you've had so far, right? I said you were somewhere right around the 45% mark, kind of depending on how you look at that with the possessions. They had so many possessions against Georgia, but the way that it kind of worked out, I think I ended up having to take one away, and somewhere around there they had like the 6 to 7 um, possessions, but kind of working those back down with field goals versus touchdowns. Okay, so that's kind of how I came up with that. Then you start to think, well, 30 looks like it can be a real possibility with being just a little bit more efficient. I think more than that, and you start asking and begging for a little bit more and getting in the unrealistic range. Not impossible, but if you find yourself getting more touchdowns and less field goals, then yes, you move yourself up into the 5 scoring possession range pretty quickly on this. Because I'm expecting this game to be somewhere in, say, the 10 possession range. 13 for Ole Miss versus Georgia, 8 essentially for Miami versus Ohio State, although it was 10, but there were two garbage uh, possessions, one at the end of each half for Miami. Reasonably say 10 to 11 possessions, right? Half of that would be 5, half of 11, 45%, about 5 in touchdowns. If that's what you're doing efficiency wise, 35 points. Okay, it's possible, but you'd have to be very, very efficient to do that. Okay, so that's the pathway I see for you to be able to do that. Now, Miami's a 3-point favorite at this point, so that would put them, reasonably expecting them to get around 38 points. Is 38 points possible? So we're going to kind of do a bit of the same thing. Um, what Miami needs to do in this game, though, is not necessarily score points. Okay, yes, I have some ideas about how this is going to work out for you too. But I think the first thing to talk about and the first thing to point out for you is to just run the ball. Just do what you do, right? There's been a lot of talk about, okay, can you do what other teams can do to affect and get those results from that team, right? Or should you just be who you are? This is why I do think some of this is pretty significant for Ole Miss, because the things that have worked well against Miami are things that Ole Miss does naturally well. Same, I think, is said in reverse for Miami. Miami runs the ball fantastic. It did not seem like that was a strength in the run defense for Ole Miss. So I would say, and of course, who's not going to say this? Run the ball. You want Ole Miss to have no more than about 9 possessions, right? 9 possessions. They're scoring, like I said, 45% of the possessions roughly, versus if they have 13 possessions. And you heard me talk about how that can balloon up into those other numbers. Keeping it on the lower side of those possession numbers definitely, in my opinion, works way, way, way into Miami's favor. So 13 possessions. Again, I was saying let's give you about 4 TDs and a couple field goals on 6 possessions, right? And that's how I kind of worked out with that. Um, uh, Ole Miss kind of worked a few things extra into their favor, I think, to kind of get to where they did. But with that being said, that would probably put them in the 34 point range, like I was saying. And if they trade a field goal or something like that, that's how you get on up into the 38 range. So if Miami's doing 50% and it comes into the 13 possessions and as efficient as they are, that yeah, you're talking about easily at minimum 6, 7 possessions right there are working into their favor. And if those start turning into touchdowns, we're talking about 42 points here. I've got every reason to think that they're going to continue to be as efficient as they currently have been, especially because they've played two really high quality defenses so far, and they're ones that I don't think that Ole Miss is going to be able to match. So, am I expecting more efficiency out of Miami? Yeah, actually, I kind of am. I mean, 50% is really, really good. You wouldn't maybe expect somebody to continue with that high of an efficiency, but considering the defensive situation that they've already been through and already been tested, I mean, can Ole Miss put up those same types of efforts? I don't think so. And then they got 24 on Ohio State. So I think that was a pretty good starting point. Add 10 points onto that just because of the increased efficiency, and that's really how I think you kind of get to a 34-point situation right off the bat. Okay, I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility, whether it's trading field goals for touchdowns or just more possessions are scored on because it's a higher possession game. So which one of this is it going to be? I really don't know. It seems in a lot of ways that it's going to work out in Miami's favor on that mark. Either way, if it's lower possession or a higher possession game. Now, Miami is not necessarily suited to play a high possession game. That's not really been again their MO. Maybe it's suited is not exactly the way to put that, but that's not been their modus operandi, right? They're not big into like slinging the ball around. Okay, I think if you get through the first quarter and you've got each of these teams have had 3 possessions, we're looking at the 13 possession range, and that's the type of prediction you're going to get out of this particular game. Now, can Miami keep that prediction, that pace up if it gets to that kind of situation? I mean, they're not really a slinging around kind of team. Ole Miss, if you're able to punch them in the mouth early, and by punch them in the mouth, I mean like get up by like 14 points, that really puts you in the ballpark of being able to maybe fend this team off because they're not exactly a comeback type of team. Not saying they can't do it, but that's not they don't throw a whole lot, right? Carson Beck's only had like what 130 yards the last few games, so they're definitely way more run heavy. And if they're behind, committing to the runs is a lot more difficult for somebody to do. You feel like you've got to throw a lot, and them throwing a lot is not probably um, it's not the way that they're going to continue that same efficiency. Okay. So if that ends up being the case, no, I don't see 34 points being in the cards in that particular way. Okay. So Miami, run the ball, take possession, hold possession, shorten this game in the traditional way of running the ball. Do not let Ole Miss have as many possessions as they want to have, okay, and scoring by volume in a large part. Bring them forward by making them respect that run and then punish them downfield, okay? Punish them with Malachi, punish them with Daniels, punish them with Marion, okay? Do what you got to do. Please slip Pringle and Porter out. Please do it. These are some of my favorite plays when these guys come out of the backfield. I'd even like to see Fletcher and Pringle in the backfield uh, because the way that Ole Miss runs their defense, I see a lot of situations when they were up against Georgia where there were some focusing issues. There absolutely were some focusing issues, and that happened on their offense as well. So if you can make things a little bit more complicated, then you can um, have some, say, more interesting and dynamic plays. Ole Miss is way more creative schematically. Okay, they've got a lot more in the bag. This is also one of the reasons why I think that they're better suited to go up against y'all than A&M is. But I'd like to see some stuff like that out of Miami too. But defensively, um, this is the this becomes a big reality if you when it comes to how many points things are going to happen. Because what if Miami starts to force turnovers? What if Miami starts to grab additional possessions, right? Um, and they've got kind of like a reasonably a 28 to 30, 34 point like base that's very reasonable for them to score on, and then they start getting additional possessions because they forced two turnovers, a fumble, maybe even two ints. God forbid they get another pick six, then 40 plus really starts to come into play. Okay, for Miami from the defensive side of things. They can also steal possessions. And this actually starts speaking to the differential that could be created by Miami. Okay. I don't really like to give a huge, like, hey, I think the score is going to be this or score is going to be that. It's more of a, I think this team's going to win and, by probably by this much. But if we're talking about differentials and we're talking about who can steal possessions better, Miami is way more suited to be able to do that with that defensive line, the ability to generate tackles for loss, the ability to generate turnovers. They've got a better track record of being able to do both of these. And when you're looking at, second and 15, third and 12, and or worse in many situations, those are drive killers. And Ole Miss is going to need probably more drives than what Miami will need. Okay. Now, of course, typically both teams get exactly the same amount because it switches after every single one always. But I think Ole Miss wants to play a higher possession game. Okay, so if they can force that into that higher possession game, then I think they feel like that definitely plays into their suit. But if if you're going to get into a 13 possession game and like they've already got seven and they're needing six possessions to get those types of points to get up in that 30, 35 yard range, a 30, 35 point range, then if Miami can somehow finagle away two additional possessions from Ole Miss, you really start limiting their point scoring potential, right? And you're looking at four possessions, maybe two TDs and two field goals. And heaven forbid, because again, I'll say the same thing in reverse that I said earlier. You are now going to be going up against a much, well, maybe not much, but a one of the highest quality defenses in college football, and they're you're playing them this week, right? So it's feasible to think, well, you might get down there into the red zone, but four times, but you may only get one touchdown out of that. I mean, this is exactly what happened to A&M. This is precisely it. So um, that I start to see how this affects the point differential that can take place. And so if you're looking at like a touchdown and maybe two field goals and 13 points, and Miami's still sitting at a reasonable like 28ish type points, then it starts to balloon up pretty quick. I, what I see out of this game is this: I see a lower floor. Excuse me, put it this back. I see a higher floor for Miami and a lower floor for Ole Miss. I see a higher potential uh, for Miami for some different reasons than what someone might think. Oh, they're like, thinking Ole Miss is the team that's supposed to do all the scoring, right? Well, sure, but kind of based off the things I've pointed out to you in this one, I don't think a lot of people are going to have the time to kind of take and think about and point out. I actually think Miami has the higher scoring potential for those reasons I was pointing out. that puts them on the winning side in both types of games. Okay. So, yes, my prediction. My prediction is that Miami does move on to this one. And I think that they move on and they cover that 3 points. By how much? That's a great question. I think I would be comfortable with at least saying I'll go 5 points. I kind of feel myself between 4 and 7, and I think I'll just go that Miami is going to win this by 5 points. They'll say or more. Okay, that's my prediction. Okay, and I wore the maroon here today, not up here, because if this works out, I am planning to put green and orange up here for the first preview of the next round. But I need y'all to do me a solid on this one and make sure that you win this round. Okay, Ole Miss, I really like y'all. And throughout this whole thing, that's just me picking what I think I see is going to take place versus based off all the film that we've reviewed on this channel. Um, if you win, I'll be right there, saying, "Hey, great job! Loved what they did this game." I would probably be a little on the surprise side and be in awe of the things that you did to do that. To be quite honest, which would be flipping amazing. But just wanted to let you know that I was trying to give you what I think is the most reasonable and objective takeaway of how this game's going to play out in particular. So good luck to you both, and I'll see you tomorrow night, probably one way or the other, early in the morning on Friday, because I'll give you a reaction one way or the other. So good luck to you both. I'm your Huckleberry.